Behind every genius, i.e. global CPO, there is a whole team of procurement pros behind the scenes helping to come up with solutions. And increasingly in today's world, behind every successful team of procurement pros, there is a network of collaborators. As innovations like AI, machine learning, the IoT and blockchain reshape entire industries, networks are becoming not only faster, but actually smarter at drawing meaningful insights from sprawling troves of seemingly unrelated data, enabling you and participants to reach out across the world, think big, and magnify your impact. The world's most powerful networks can evaluate immense amounts of information, identify and resolve issues, and mitigate risks, ultimately extending competitive advantage for your organisation. Of course, at Procurious, we're no strangers to the idea that a powerful network can be the making of a procurement or supply chain team, which is why I'm really excited for today's webinar, which is Heads Up, Using Your Network to Spend Intelligently. I'm joined today by Pat McCarthy, Senior Vice President and General Manager of SAP Arriba, and Johnny Jackson, Global Process Lead, Source Supply Chain Centre of Excellence at International Paper. Johnny began his 34-year career at International Paper as a process engineer and has since gained multifunctional management experience, including time in manufacturing, product management, sales management, project management, and procurement. Pat McCarthy is one of the driving forces behind SAP's Procurement with Purpose initiatives. He sits on the board of Chicago Tech Academy, a charter nonprofit for Chicago high school students, and supports global charitable endeavours through Kiva. Pat, we're thrilled to have you back with us again. And as many of you know, SAP Arriba is the world's largest business network, operating in more than 190 countries and trading nearly $3 trillion US, which is an incredible number, in goods and services each year. So, Pat, let's start with you. What is a business network and how does it work for procurement pros?
Well, thank you very much, Tanya. I'm very pleased to be joining you and Johnny here today. And that's a very common question about what is a business network. And I think you can think of a business network, first of all, as a platform that provides trust and transparency. So it's a platform for buyers and sellers where they can be sure that there's trust and insights across their trading relationship. And since it's a platform and since it's a many-to-many platform, it brings additional insights for the buyer and the seller. So for the buyer, it gives them insights into what's going on in their supply chain, maybe at the first level, the second level, the third level of their supply chain. So a business network can give them the insights into risk that they may not have been aware of if it weren't a platform, if it were an EDI kind of transaction. And then it opens up additional sources of supply, and so it gives them insights into where can I source this product and where can I find these resources in a more global way. And that becomes the points I made about trust and transparency become really important when you talk about sourcing from new locations, new suppliers, new geographies around the world. And then if you're a seller, it gives you access to the world's Fortune 500, the world's Fortune 1000, the largest companies in the world, and also some very small and innovative providers. But if you're a seller, it gives you insights and access through RFPs, RFIs, and then allows you to create this digital connection with the buyer so that you can better propose your brands, your goods, your services, and truly become a global provider in this marketplace. And then the final thing, this is all about operating in real time. Any platform can't be based on paper, can't be based on EDI. It has to be based on real-time digital exchange, machine to machine, or at least machine to person, and where we're not encumbered by batch processes or offline exchanges, this idea that it's happening in real time in your business and your suppliers and your network are aware of it.
Sounds ideal, and obviously a network contains a lot of people, millions of buyers and sellers in one community. And I know that you've often said, and You said in a recent article on Procurious, seldom do we succeed when flying solo. So can you outline some of the benefits for us of bringing everyone together in one digital community?
Yeah, I think particularly for the procurement professional, this idea that having a single source of supply and this single relationship has been pushed to the wayside. That procurement professionals realize that they need to have multiple parties. They need to take their demand and have their first source of demand or their trusted supply across a few providers, but also know where else are they going to go in the world to source and acquire that product, because who knows what tariffs are going to do or supply chain disruption, or that single source of supply can disrupt the entire supply chain in your infrastructure. And so this idea of only flying solo, I think, is the first challenge that procurement professionals need to solve. And the second one is, I think the role of procurement is changing from just purely being, buy for less, to truly being innovation scouts for their organization. So they're out there looking for, in their supply base and their potential suppliers, they're looking for the next great idea that they can bring inside of their organization. And that's really amazing when that happens, when procurement turns into this innovation scout and is really sourcing and finding new sources of innovative supply in the supply base. And that's a huge benefit for organizations that are willing, to not go it alone and to embrace the idea of a global network.
It's very hard to find all the answers just sitting at your desk and just talking to people within your own company. And that's something I'm going to be talking a bit about in Austin at SAP Arriba Live, is that we can't come up with strategy in a silo. You really need to know what's happening out there in the world, and I know a lot of people are always hesitant to sort of reach out and get the latest information, but it's critical if you're going to develop a winning strategy, because you've got to beat your competitors. So Johnny, let's have a word from industry now. So Johnny, before we get started, can you share with our listeners what it's actually like to work in procurement at International Paper?
Thank you, Tanya, for that chance to describe a little bit about International Paper. So International Paper, we view our mission in the world is to transform renewable resources into products people depend on every day. And I think about our core businesses. We make cellulose fibers, which go into a multitude of products, and from diapers to other forms of cellulose. We make packaging that's used to ultimately put boxes that we move goods to and from every day in our world, and papers that, papers, some people say paper is dead, and everybody says click to start getting electronic transactions. My desk is still surrounded by papers. They're still core parts that I want to view in paper. So these are products that people depend on every day. We operate inside of North America, EMEA, Brazil. And for procurement, you think about the things that we buy in order to make these products. So yes, a major part of the equation is fiber. Both it's fiber from trees, which is a renewable resource, as well as fiber that is recycled. But we also buy various chemicals and other raw materials that go into making the products. We buy maintenance, repair, and operating materials that go to operating the equipment in our plants to make these products. We buy energy. We buy transportation. And something that people don't really think about is what are all the things to make the corporation run. So part of what we buy is the things to make the products, but then you've got to buy all the different things that make the corporation run, whether that's office supplies or benefits. So a day in the life of a procurement professional at International Paper could be buying any one of these things. Of course, people tend to stratify to a commodity that they like, but we are buying these items every day in order to make the products and make the corporation run. We're buying both at a strategic level and then also at the plant tactical execution level.
Oh, Johnny, that sounds fascinating, and what great career opportunities there must be for professionals in your organisation when you go through that. I mean, global, commodities, transactionals, direct, indirect, as well as a huge sustainability agenda, I'm sure. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sure everyone will be interested. Johnny, what do you see the benefits of participating in a global network?
Sure, Tanya. I'll reference back one of the things that Pat referenced in his earlier comment about that you could do EDI. We could build out EDI connections to our suppliers, but that means we'd be doing it thousands of times. And instead, what the global network offers us, both, is being able to tie into that network of sellers and buyers. We're able to establish that one connection and build and tie into an existing network of connections. What that does for us then, it gives us a means that we can instantly start improving our timeliness and transparencies of transactions. And then what we were looking to accomplish is we wanted to improve that speed and accuracy of orders, resulting in, for instance, real-time confirmations and move invoicing into the digital age. And that network gives us that place for real-time communications with our suppliers.
So, Pat, there's a lot of people today talking about spending intelligently. What does that actually mean to you? Because, there is a lot of banter about it, a lot of discussion, and of course, very appealing as a procurement pro. We all want to be the smartest guy in the room. So, what does this term spending intelligently mean to you?
Yeah, I think it starts with foundationally something Johnny just mentioned there, which is accuracy. So let's just start with that. Let's start with clean, high-quality data exchange between the parties, and then once we have that, it's not just about price. It's being able to tap into the social intelligence of my organization. Who else is acquiring this good or this service? How do they rate it? What was their feedback on this particular item? Maybe that's across divisions, and so you're getting more corporate level feedback instead of just my work group. And then what about the community providing intelligence and insight and information around RFI and RFP templates that are shared across the organization? And then how about mining our rich treasure trove of data and guiding users through a procurement process or through a sourcing process? And so this idea to say that as you build and as you leverage the network data, if I'm going to go source $2 million USD of a commodity, why isn't the system helping me understand that, if it's $2 million and you're sourcing this particular commodity class, you should invite 7 suppliers, and it should be a 4-step process. It should go from 7 to 5 to 3 to 2. Taking me through that process. And if I've been procuring for 25 years, that may not be new news. But if I've been procuring for 2 months, that's incredibly helpful. And what we're really doing is leveraging the data and the content across the network to provide those kinds of insights and those kinds of capabilities. And it doesn't require a data scientist or somebody who's a machine learning expert. It's really just intelligence is assistance with the process, and so that I'm better informed with deeper insights and can produce a better outcome for myself and for my organization.
Sounds fairly ideal to me. As you know, we're all faced with all sorts of risks, black swan events from natural disasters, exchange rates spiking, and unforeseen political events. I mean, it just keeps on coming at the moment, doesn't it? Once again, how can our networks help deliver savings by making these sorts of risks more manageable?
Well, you can mine a digital network and look for warning signs before something happens, and so you can use network data and insights combined with third-party data and third-party content to get a heads up about what's going on. That same digital network can present you with alternatives, whether it's sourcing alternatives, alternative sources of existing supply, transportation alternatives. Where else can I turn for this? And then ideally, you're going to have, for critical key components, you're going to have some of those pre-subscribed, and you're going to have some of those thought out. And then in an ongoing nature outside of cataclysmic events, that the network can provide you insights into just your normal supply base, which are your suppliers or their suppliers' suppliers, or suppliers' might have pending financial, trade, legal risks that you want to be aware of, and that is the normal course of your sourcing process. You're going to put mitigation strategies into what your sourcing strategy and your procurement strategy is, so that you have a rich, robust, and resilient supply chain. And the network gives supply chain and procurement professionals a capability to do that. They could do it on their own. That's picking up a phone book, that's going to a lot of trade conferences, that's trying to figure this out on their own, or they can leverage the network to find those suppliers and find the suppliers that meet their criteria around the world.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the phone book, because there are a lot of our listeners who may not have the ability to invest in some of these digital networks. So, it's a stark reminder of if we don't have technology, life is a lot tougher, isn't it? But Johnny, drawing on your own personal experiences, hopefully you haven't had to use the phone book too often, but can you share with our listeners any examples or occasions when your procurement network has helped you to mitigate and manage risk?
Yeah, certainly. As a global operations, especially spread across the U.S., but EMEA, Brazil as well, we've certainly had times when we've had weather-related incidents, such as a hurricane that interrupts our operations, and whether we're relying on our formal networks or our informal networks, we have to keep supply moving into our areas, as well as providing assistance to the employees that actually are operating in those areas. So we rely on those networks, but even a little more simply, beyond the disaster, because we get into disaster, we're in crisis mode, and we tend to operate that really well. Thinking about a procurement network, though, just a few more even simple examples is, processing a PO confirmation from the network and getting that as soon as you've submitted the PO, that helps us ensure that we've got that right maintenance part in our manufacturing facility at the right time, prevent a production disruption. You may have had a mechanical job that's planned, and if the part hasn't arrived, either we're at risk of downtime or delay in that maintenance job. Another example of, managing spend through catalogs helps us to ensure that requisitioners are buying from the right suppliers and buying at the right prices. And that's mitigating our risk of rogue spend and or pricing non-compliance. And we've had some examples of both where, as procurement professionals, that's something that we're trying to work every day to drive both utilization of our contracts that we've negotiated, as well as ensure that we're getting the right pricing.
And we all know how important price and delivering those savings are to our profession. But, increasingly, too, it's about keeping our companies off the front page, isn't it? And to make sure that our stock prices and shareholder value isn't eroded by some of these unexpected events that we've been talking about. So once again, Pat, this is very much an international issue. Procurement and supply chain pros need to be able to shine a light on the materials and regions that are most at risk. Once again, how does a network help in terms of predicting these potential issues?
That's a great question, and I think I'll build on Johnny's point there that procurement professionals are relied on to make sure that we're able to keep manufacturing and our other facilities running every single minute, every single hour of every single day. But when we're dealing with things like tariffs or metal escalations, a network can provide that procurement professional additional insights into where they can go and how they can understand the impact and where they can go to solve the impact. They can rely on the data science and the intelligence to forecast not only the operational trends and the operational impacts of that, but what are the financial impacts of that. And then they can use those insights and that data intelligence to shine a light on identifying their suppliers they may not be aware of that have an issue, and then work with that provider or find alternative sources of supply. And so all of this isn't just about working around your supply base. A lot of what we want to use data intelligence and insight for is to helping your current suppliers actually even get better at what they're doing for you today.
And what about all this data? We've stopped hearing so much about big data, fortunately, because it was a very overused term. But, obviously we are collecting a lot of, vast quantities of data that were previously deemed useless. Johnny, have you found that this is permitting your team to focus more on strategic responsibilities, having this network and the data being managed and the visibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Several years ago, we were doing an evaluation of making an investment in our procure-to-pay network solution, and really considered that investment in the network and then ultimately an investment in SAP Arriba, largely as a means of trying to improve our transactional efficiency between International Paper and our suppliers, and a desire to also make purchasing simpler for our users. And I give you one example of that transactional efficiency. An inordinate amount of time was spent by our purchasing people trying to resolve problem invoices. And as a result of operating more efficiently with the data on the network, we're seeing a reduction in that occurrence of problem invoices, which now allows our procurement professionals time to spend on more value-added activities.
And what sort of things have they been able to focus on? Have you seen some real lifts in some areas?
Certainly. Often in the past, as maintenance jobs are done at the executional plant, maintenance planners would come walk in with their job and say, all right, I've already got 3 bids, issue it to supplier A. And in reality, that's never really gone, a good scope wasn't developed, a good quote process wasn't developed, and the contract wasn't necessarily for the most effective terms for International Paper. Now our facility level purchasing teams are having more time in order to spend to help those maintenance teams develop more effective bids, and that we get effective contracts in place.
Right, because we know everyone's time poor, and if we can make these things as efficient as possible and have our procurement and supply chain pros working on the value add, it makes a huge difference, particularly when we're under so many budget constraints around the world, which leads to resource constraints. So I can see how that would be of value. I guess in that vein, in addition to our day job, we're also being responsible for the ethical conduct of our suppliers and their suppliers. We talked about the multiple tiers earlier. And, we can see now that it's not just about savings. Procurement pros are expected to focus on diversity, environmental impact, and also protect the corporate brand. So, Pat, how did Business Network support this expanding mandate of the procurement professional? And I mean, it's exciting for us because it is giving us a broader mandate and more responsibility, but obviously with that comes increased accountability. So how can our network help us step up into this sort of corporate stewardship role?
Yeah, there's a lot that, we feel like there's a lot that SAP Ariba can do on our own, meaning do we really understand the supplier? Are we giving accurate information on who the supplier is, what their corporate hierarchy looks like, and monitoring and managing some of the financial information and highlighting some of the risks. But then we also believe that this takes a community to pull this content and this information together to properly serve customers. And so we partner with, companies like Made in the Free World or EcoVadis or Kinaxis and others to make sure that our customers have this really rich and robust and complete view of their supplier and their supply base, and then understanding the importance of that supplier in their overall lives. Like, this is an approved supplier, but we're not doing any business, or this is an approved supplier and we have tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions, and we've got some concerns about maybe not them directly, but a sister company or a supplier to them, and giving those insights and highlighting those risks to our customers, and so they can take the appropriate action, do additional investigation, have conversations with the suppliers, and as I mentioned earlier, where appropriate, help the suppliers work through some of those issues, but where they don't think it's appropriate, find those alternative sources of supply. And so really a big part of this is about helping the community come together to understand their supply base and their suppliers more intimately.
Johnny, what about you and your organization with this broader mandate?
Yeah, we are definitely seeing a growing demand for this type of information from our customers, and frequently receiving surveys, questionnaires for supply chain transparency, not just out of our own manufacturing facilities and products, but they want to know up the supply chain from us how we're managing that. And we've had a few examples where some customers or potential customers, they've ended up making supply decisions of whether to buy from us or not based on these responses to these surveys. As I talk with peer companies, I find that many of us are facing the same thing and often cobbling together the information in different ways. And I do see that I like what Pat just said about that it takes a community to pull this information together. And so the potential for the network to serve as that community, to make those connections between supplier to customer, or customer to supplier 1, supplier 2, supplier 3, up the supply chain, that's ultimately what's going to be needed. And we just need to continue to think about how do we expand that technological and social reporting capabilities in that supply chain and up that tier of supply chain network to try and leverage that transparency.
And how difficult has that been?
I used the term a few minutes ago about the cobbling together. In today's world, it's often cobbling together. And most of these requests, they come in through the sales team, and then the sales team has to make the connection to the procurement team in order to get those answers. And then we put everything together that we can, but getting the transparency up the supply chain is the most difficult part.
Well, I guess it gives you a lot of reasons to talk to your sales team that may not have been there in the past.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. So, Pat, I'm very excited to be joining you for your first Sustainability Summit, Arriba Live in Austin. And I guess, are all these risks, black swan events, the need for transparency driving you to initiate this discussion? Because, there's not many companies holding these sort of forums on these topics. So congratulations. I hope it goes well. And what are you going to be talking about? What am I going to be talking about, more to the point?
Yeah, I think it's going to be... I've got
a few weeks to prepare.
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. The real driver behind the Sustainability Summit is partially where we were just talking about this idea that it takes a community to come together to help tackle these initiatives, and that when you add up the spend power of all of these Arriba customers, when you look at our 3.7 million suppliers on the network, we really feel like we have an obligation to be talking about sustainability, risk mitigation, ethical supply chains, because of where we sit. We're honored to be the backbone for so much of this digital commerce that's happening in the world today, and using that position to do things like be a patron sponsor for the United Nations and their global compact around decent work in global supply chains, to being able to bring great companies like International Paper and other global Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies that really care about these topics to share the ideas and the insights about how their international supply chains can participate in more sustainable and ethical business, and understanding that redirecting or better directing maybe is a nicer way to say that, just a small portion of their direct and indirect spend today can have incredible impacts in the world. And then the ecosystems of partners that exist to help our customers, our buyers, and our suppliers understand the kinds of things and strategies that they can deploy and make it real, and leveraging our technology to make it real, but being able to tie their personal passion for this topic to the business processes to drive the outcomes. And so this day is all going to be about experts, content, information sharing around running sustainable and ethical supply chains, and leveraging procurement to do good in the world.
Well, that's a very noble cause, and it sounds like you're doing some amazing work, and it's going to be great to have everyone in the one city talking about these topics and other things, of course. If we sort of step away from, the technology network, something I'm always talking about is that there's no such thing as solo genius, and that procurement pros have to collaborate to proliferate. It's important for our survival, and that's why we started Procurious, really, was to connect professionals around the globe. Johnny, just a broader sort of career question. How has collaboration helped you throughout your career?
Tanya, that's a really great question. It's rare that we can really accomplish anything of ourselves. We often may like to think that we're the smartest person in the room, but usually we're not. Most often, we always have to work with others if we really want to advance a goal or initiative, and that's true whether it's our own personal goals or initiatives or the goals of the organization teams in which we operate. And then plugging into our stakeholders and understanding stakeholders' perspectives are key to really advancing and making any change, and making that change last and sustain. You've got to gain that collaboration of those stakeholders if you want them to then be a part of it and to make it stay in place.
Great words of advice. And Pat, what about from you? I mean, particularly from the Business Network's perspective.
Yeah, I think when I think about Procurious, I think the fact that it's a procurement network, and that you've got a gathering. And I'm talking about Procurious here specifically, saying this is a great example about how does a solution provider in this space that wants to do more, like Arriba, how do we contribute and participate to understand the kinds of pains and challenges, the future direction? How are we listening to customers and others that are participating and sharing their issues and challenges, and thinking about how is our solution today, and then in the midterm and then in the long term, going to help them face those challenges? And then I think the final point is, how do we stay very relevant? How are we not, becoming, thinking only about the past? How are we really thinking about the future of supply chain? I mentioned innovation scouts. I think marketplaces are going to become bigger and bigger in supply chain and replace catalogs. There's all of these future topics. And so this idea of networks and communities coming together includes technology, but it also includes forums like Procurious.
Well, thank you, Pat, for endorsing that. I mean, we'd like to think we're helping everyone, particularly as we face these new technologies in Industry 4.0. I think it's critical that the profession stays on the forefront. And, I've been saying recently, fortune favours the bold, so really we encourage people to really get out there and try some of these new technologies. And, hopefully you won't be penalised for trying something new, because we do have to take some risks in order to make some gains. So we're almost out of time. So I guess just a final opportunity from both of you. What's some words of advice to listeners on leveraging the power of their networks? Pat, why don't we start with you, and then Johnny, we'll hear your words of advice.
Yeah, I think number one is to get started. I think that's a somewhat simplistic answer. I think if you look at the challenges that exist with procurement today, having an understanding that doing something, that everybody doing something can have an impact, and so figure out what that is for you. If that's understanding your supply base better, if that's transacting across a network in more real time, if that's just maybe really just dealing with what's going on the payment side of your process. But pick a spot to start for your organization. Experiment, retry, expand, and get going. And I think a great spot to do that, obviously, is at SAP Arriba Live. The first one, as we've mentioned, in Austin, the first week of April, and then we'll be, for the European listeners, we'll be in Barcelona in June, where you can kind of go there to see where can I experiment, where can I try, where can I leverage the community content, the community intelligence that we've been talking about to go off and to help the world run better.
And Johnny, what about you? Final words of advice to everyone listening.
As I think about technology, social platforms, networks, they're creating a means of collaboration that are far different than when I started my career. That the power of information that we have carrying in our hand in the form of a smartphone is so much greater than what we had 30 years ago. The ability then to utilize that information and to make connections beyond one's internal organizations is just growing exponentially, and it's one of the things I'm intentionally trying to do and encourage some of my organization to do. Is that too often we think of ourselves only inside of our own internal world, and we really need to develop more of that external view of what's happening in the world around us. I can say for myself and my organization, I think we're still very much in that discovery mode, learning how do we really capitalize on these platforms that every one of us use, both in our personal life and our work life today, to really leverage the power of that network for the future.
Thank you, Johnny and Pat. Very inspiring. And I guess I'll finish with just saying, what Barry Padgett said recently, SAP Ariba's president, is procurement professionals have every right to expect that their network they rely on can be intuitive, reliable, and above all, consistent in delivering on their promises. So I think for everyone listening, you need to ask yourself whether it's a technology platform network or your own personal network. Is it delivering for you what you require? Are you staying on top of the risks? Are you growing your knowledge base? Are you advancing your career? And if it's not, demand it, change something, because you are all part of a vast, virtual, global procurement team full of millions of talented professionals with ideas that can really help you. But help is only a click away. So thank you for listening today.